What happens when a ghost from America's most classified operations hides in plain sight among the very warriors he once trained? The answer would shake the foundations of everything these recruits thought they knew about heroism, sacrifice, and the price of serving in the shadows. Welcome to the Ghostline Command. Before we continue, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who were never meant to be forgotten. The Invisible Man, he always arrived before dawn, long before the recruits showed up. Sweeping the floors in the waiting room, hood up, eyes lowered, just like he had done 1,000 times before. No one ever paid him much attention. The base clock read 4:30 when his worn boots first touched the compound floor each morning. But no guard ever logged his arrival. No camera ever caught him entering. He was simply there, like morning fog that appears without explanation. The SEAL training compound in Coronado wasn't just any military facility. It was a crucible where America's most elite warriors were forged. Every surface, every piece of equipment, every corner held the sweat and determination of men who would go on to execute missions that would never see the light of day. And moving through it all, invisible as a shadow, was a man whose presence would soon unravel a mystery 20 years in the making. On the duty roster, he was listed as a maintenance civilian contractor. A number, not a name. No background check on file, just a security clearance that somehow passed through channels without question. He wore the same uniform every day. Gray coveralls that had seen better decades, a dark blue hoodie with frayed edges, and combat boots so worn the treads had been replaced by smooth leather. Those boots carried the reddish dust of foreign deserts, though no one thought to ask which ones. The other civilian contractors came and went. Kitchen staff lasted 3 months before the brutal schedule broke them. Drivers quit after failed security screenings. Administrative personnel transferred out when the weight of classified material became too heavy to bear. But not him. He never complained, never took a day off, never got in anyone's way. He was a fixture, as permanent and unremarkable as the concrete walls themselves. The sacred space, the SEAL compound gym, wasn't like a normal gym. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It was sacred ground where legends were born and dreams were buried. Every man who stepped through its doors understood that iron meant pain, and pain was the currency that bought transformation. The sound of disciplined grunts, plates clanging with military precision, and controlled movements filled the air as candidates ran through circuits until their hands bled raw and their minds cracked open to reveal what lay beneath. But before that symphony of suffering began each day, there was only silence. And in that silence he worked, sweeping floors with mechanical precision, restocking protein powder containers with mathematical accuracy, wiping down equipment that would soon be baptized in the sweat of America's future guardians. He moved like a ghost through the sacred space, never disrupting, never intruding, always disappearing before the first instructor arrived. Most of the younger guys didn't even register his existence. They were too focused on surviving each day, each hour, each brutal minute that stood between them and the trident they desperately sought. Their worlds had narrowed to reps and times, push-ups and pull-ups, the next meal and the next challenge. In their tunnel vision of ambition, maintenance staff were invisible, but some of the older instructors had begun to notice strange details that didn't quite fit the profile of an ordinary janitor. The way he folded towels tight, precise, with hospital corners that could pass a military inspection. The way he stacked plates balanced by weight, not size, creating perfect equilibrium that spoke of someone who understood leverage and physics at an intuitive level. The way his eyes tracked movement in the mirror, never staring, just observing with a scanning pattern that seemed too systematic for casual interest. The anomaly's chief petty officer, Mason Rodriguez, had been training SEALs for 12 years. He'd seen every type of contractor, every personality, every hustle. Kitchen staff who tried to sell supplements to recruits. Drivers who asked too many questions about missions. Maintenance workers who lingered too long near classified briefing rooms. But this one was different. This one asked nothing, said nothing, wanted nothing. Mason started making mental notes. The janitor never wore headphones during work, unusual for someone doing repetitive tasks. He never carried a personal phone, not even an old flip phone tucked in a pocket. His movements were economical, never wasted, each action serving a purpose. And though he moved with the careful deliberation of a man carrying age in his bones, certain things didn't add up. His knees didn't crack when he crouched to retrieve equipment from low shelves. His hands didn't shake when he handled delicate electronic components. His breathing remained steady during physical tasks that should have winded a sedentary maintenance worker. And when he picked up a 45-pound Olympic bar to move it from one rack to another, he did it with a grip that spoke of decades of familiarity with such weight, a grip that hadn't softened despite years away from active training. The younger recruits, when they noticed him at all, sometimes joked about his presence. Probably some washed-out wannabe who never made it through selection, one whispered during a water break. Another added that he applied years ago and couldn't handle the pressure. They saw his quiet demeanor as weakness, his invisibility as failure. But Mason shut down such talk with a single glance that could freeze desert sand. Mason was tough, quiet, and not prone to nonsense or sentiment. He'd served with men who never came home, trained recruits who went on to earn names in the history books, and witnessed acts of heroism that would never be publicly acknowledged. His respect wasn't easily earned, but something about the janitor commanded it in ways Mason couldn't articulate. The security clearance mystery. The Naval Special Warfare Command processed thousands of security clearances annually. Background investigators combed through financial records, interviewed neighbors, polygraphed family members, and constructed detailed profiles of anyone who would have access to sensitive areas. The process typically took months and generated thick files documenting every aspect of a person's life. But somehow, the janitor's clearance had processed in record time. No extensive interviews, no deep financial investigation, no psychological evaluation. Just a stamp of approval that moved through channels with unusual speed. When junior administrative officers tried to access his full file for routine updates, they found themselves redirected to databases they didn't have clearance to view. His background check goes deeper than ours do, whispered Petty Officer Sarah Chun, who handled contractor paperwork. Whatever level of clearance he has, it's above my pay grade to even see it. This created its own mysteries. Who was he before he became a janitor? What kind of civilian work required such extensive security screening? Why would someone with high-level clearance accept minimum wage maintenance work at a military training facility? The questions multiplied, but answers remained elusive. The observation recruit Danny Dawson had been at the compound for 8 weeks. 8 weeks of 4:30 wake-ups, of pushing his body beyond limits he didn't know existed, of discovering that mental toughness was built through physical punishment. He'd watched 17 men from his original class wash out, some from injury, some from exhaustion, most from the simple realization that they weren't built for this level of sacrifice. On this particular morning, after a brutal weight circuit that had left 3 men vomiting and 2 others questioning their life choices, Dawson collapsed onto a bench. His lungs burned, his vision blurred at the edges, and sweat poured from every pore. As he leaned forward to catch his breath, he glanced sideways at the janitor, who was methodically wiping down the floor nearby, moving in concentric circles that covered every square inch without overlap. The morning California sun streamed through the high windows, creating harsh shadows and bright patches. In one of those bright patches, the janitor's hood slipped just enough to expose a section of skin behind his left ear. What Dawson saw there made his blood freeze and his fatigue disappear instantly. It wasn't a civilian tattoo. It wasn't some random design chosen from a parlor wall. It was military ink of the most specific and exclusive kind, a trident piercing a skull, rendered in the precise style used only by certain special operations units. But this wasn't the standard SEAL Trident that many operators wore with pride. This was different, darker, more detailed. The kind of ink that marked membership in units so classified they didn't officially exist. The skull bore additional markings that Dawson recognized from his obsessive study of special operations history. Small numerical inscriptions that indicated specific operations. Date codes that corresponded to missions that were still classified decades later. And wrapped around the Trident's shaft, almost too small to read, were letters that made Dawson's hands shake. ST6. The research that night, alone in his bunk while his fellow recruits slept the sleep of the exhausted, Dawson couldn't stop his mind from racing. He'd spent years before enlisting studying military history, special operations, the legends and myths that surrounded America's most elite units. He knew enough to recognize what he'd seen, but not enough to understand its full implications. Using his personal laptop during the brief evening free time, he carefully navigated to forums he wasn't supposed to know about. Deep corners of the internet where former operators, military historians, and serious researchers discussed matters that never appeared in official records. Most of it was speculation and fantasy, keyboard warriors playing at understanding worlds they'd never enter. But buried in the nonsense were threads of truth, verified accounts, and rare photographs that told stories of operations that officially never happened. He found images that matched what he'd seen, not exactly, but close enough to confirm his suspicions. The Trident skull design appeared in a classified document that had been partially declassified 20 years after the fact, with most details still redacted. The numerical codes corresponded to operations in the Horn of Africa, Southeast Asia, and Middle Eastern theaters during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Operations conducted by units so secret their existence was denied even to Congress. One forum post from a user with verified operator credentials mentioned seeing similar tattoos on men who had disappeared from official records after completing missions that would remain classified for 50 years. These were operators who had conducted work so sensitive that their identities became national security secrets. When they retired, they didn't write memoirs or give interviews. They vanished into civilian life with new identities and backgrounds scrubbed clean. The awakening, the next morning, Dawson wasn't alone in his scrutiny. Word hadn't spread through direct conversation. SEAL candidates learned early that loose talk could end careers. But awareness spread through glances, through the subtle body language changes of men who had trained to notice details others missed. The instructors started behaving differently around the janitor. Not cautiously, not suspiciously, but with a deference that spoke to recognition of shared brotherhood. Mason Rodriguez found himself making excuses to be in the gym when the janitor worked. He'd stand at the equipment cage pretending to inventory gear while actually observing movement patterns, posture, the way hands naturally fell into ready positions that civilians never learned. What he saw confirmed suspicions that had been building for months. The way the janitor swept wasn't random. It followed a pattern that ensured maximum visual coverage of the entire room. His cleaning stations were positioned at points that offered clear sightlines to all entrances and exits. When new equipment arrived, he examined it with the thoroughness of someone checking for tampering or surveillance devices. These weren't the habits of a maintenance worker. They were the ingrained reflexes of someone trained in counter-surveillance and operational security. Other details became apparent under focused scrutiny. The janitor never positioned himself with his back to open areas. He instinctively moved to create barriers between himself and potential threats. When conversations occurred nearby, His cleaning pace slowed just enough to allow passive eavesdropping without appearing obvious. His eyes constantly tracked personnel movements, cataloging faces, behaviors, anything that deviated from normal patterns. The confrontation it was Grant Morrison who finally broke the unspoken rules of observation. Grant was a big kid from East Texas, built like a linebacker with the swagger to match. He'd washed out of the program once before, returning meaner and more determined, but also more prone to proving his toughness through confrontation. He was exactly the type of recruit who needed to learn respect the hard way. On a particularly brutal Thursday morning, after a circuit that had left half the class questioning their life choices, Grant decided he needed to establish some kind of dominance over what he perceived as the weakest target available. The janitor was methodically cleaning bloodstains from the grappling mats, evidence of two candidates who had pushed beyond their limits in ground combat training. "Hey, old man," Grant called out, loud enough for the entire gym to hear. "You ever do more than clean sweat off the floor? Ever actually train like a man instead of just watching?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The rhythmic clanging of weights ceased. Even the most focused recruits looked up from their sets to witness what was about to unfold. But the janitor didn't react. He continued his methodical cleaning, each motion deliberate and controlled, as if Grant's words were just more background noise to be filtered out. Grant, interpreting the silence as weakness, pressed harder. "Awkward silence, huh? Guess that answers my question. Probably applied for this program years ago and couldn't hack it. Now you're stuck cleaning up after real men." That's when Mason Rodriguez moved. Not rushing, not shouting, just a purposeful walk across the gym floor that made every recruit understand they were about to witness something significant. Mason had commanded respect through 12 years of training warriors, but his approach now carried different energy. This wasn't instructor authority. This was something deeper. He leaned in close to Grant, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the silent gymnasium. "If you want to finish this program, you'll shut your mouth and show some damn respect. Right now." The words carried weight beyond their volume. Grant, for all his bluster and previous bravado, recognized the tone of a man who had seen combat, lost friends, and earned the right to demand respect through blood and sacrifice. He didn't say another word for the rest of the day, but the damage was done. The invisible janitor was invisible no more. The legend begins words spread through the compound like wildfire contained in whispers. The cleaning staff knew something was different. The kitchen workers sensed a shift in atmosphere. Even the administrative personnel felt the change in how people moved through spaces where the janitor worked. Some started calling him the ghost, never to his face, always in hushed conversations during meal breaks or late-night discussions in the barracks. Others began referring to him as Sir without understanding why, their military training triggering automatic respect for something they couldn't quite identify. A few of the more observant recruits noticed that senior officers, men who commanded respect from everyone on base, would nod slightly when they passed him in hallways, but the janitor acknowledged any of it. He maintained his routine with robotic consistency. 4:30 arrival, methodical cleaning, strategic positioning, silent observation, invisible departure. If anything, the attention seemed to make him more careful about maintaining his cover. Who'd stayed up longer. His movements became even more economical. He spoke even less than before, which hardly seemed possible, yet his presence had fundamentally changed. Where once he had been truly invisible, now he was deliberately overlooked. People knew he was there, but chose not to see him, like adults pretending not to notice a surprise party being planned. The difference was subtle but significant, and it created an atmosphere of expectation that something important was building beneath the surface. Mason Rodriguez began studying the janitor with professional interest, applying skills learned through Years of evaluating recruits and identifying potential threats. What he discovered convinced him that his instincts had been correct from the beginning. This wasn't just another civilian contractor earning minimum wage at a military facility. This was someone with extensive training trying very hard to appear ordinary. The revealed 3 weeks after Grant's confrontation, the compound's aging fire suppression system malfunctioned during a routine wait circuit. A short in the electrical panel triggered smoke alarms throughout the building while simultaneously activating emergency lighting and ventilation systems. The resulting chaos filled hallways with electrical smoke and triggered full evacuation protocols. Most personnel followed standard procedures, filing out through designated exits with the discipline expected of military professionals. But recruit Kevin Simmons, already pushed beyond his physical limits by morning training, collapsed halfway to the exit when an old knee injury, aggravated by dehydration and exhaustion, locked up completely. 2 fellow recruits tried to help but hesitated at the threshold when smoke from burning electrical components began obscuring visibility in the corridor. It would have taken the base medical team at least 5 minutes to respond with proper equipment and personnel. In a smoke-filled building, 5 minutes could mean the difference between rescue and recovery operation. It took the janitor 30 seconds. He moved through the smoke without hesitation, navigating by memory and instinct through corridors he knew better than anyone realized. No protective equipment, just a towel wrapped around his mouth and nose. When he reached Simmons, there was no fumbling, no uncertainty about how to safely move an injured person. He executed a textbook fireman's carry, one arm locking Simmons' leg behind the knee, the other controlling balance across the shoulder, distributing 215 pounds of dead weight with mathematical precision. The evacuation looked effortless, but those who witnessed it recognized the technique. This wasn't basic first aid training or civilian emergency response. This was advanced combat casualty extraction, performed by someone who had done it under fire in circumstances where hesitation meant death. The janitor emerged from the smoke with steady breathing, clear eyes, and movements that remained controlled despite having just carried a grown man through a hazardous environment. He laid Simmons gently on the medical mat outside the building and stepped back without a word, disappearing into the crowd of evacuated personnel as if nothing extraordinary had happened. When the fire department arrived minutes later, they found a minor electrical problem and praised the quick thinking of whoever had evacuated the injured recruit. But no official report mentioned the janitor's name, and he never stepped forward to claim recognition. The confirmation later that evening, as the compound returned to normal operations and the excitement of the evacuation faded into routine paperwork, Dawson found himself walking past the janitor's equipment cart during a brief break between training sessions. The cart sat in its usual position near the equipment cage, unattended while its owner completed some task elsewhere in the building. Something caught his eye, a small detail that would have been invisible to casual observation, but stood out to someone actively looking for clues. Inside the front pocket of the cart's storage bag, barely visible through worn fabric, was a patch. Not sewn on the outside where it could be easily seen, but positioned where only someone reaching into the pocket would encounter it. Black thread on black fabric, the letters faded but still legible to someone who knew what to look for. ST-6, SEAL. Team 6, the most elite counter-terrorism unit in the American military. The unit that didn't officially acknowledge its members, didn't keep public records of operations, and recruited only from the top percentage of an already elite community. SEAL Team 6 operators were ghosts by design. Their identities were classified. Their operations were denied, and their existence was officially limited to what appeared in heavily redacted congressional testimony. When they retired, they signed non-disclosure agreements that lasted for decades. They received new social security numbers, scrubbed backgrounds, and cover stories that explained their civilian employment without revealing their true capabilities. Suddenly, Everything made perfect sense. The security clearance that processed without normal investigation. The physical capabilities hidden beneath aging contractor appearance. The tactical awareness disguised as janitorial efficiency. The respect from senior officers who recognized something they couldn't openly acknowledge. The understanding the revelation spread through the compound like a controlled burn, shared only among those with the wisdom to understand its significance, and the discretion to keep it quiet. The janitor continued his routine, but now people understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, a living legend hiding in plain sight among the warriors he had once trained to follow in his footsteps. Mason Rodriguez began seeing the janitor's morning routine in a new light. Each action served multiple purposes, maintaining cover while providing overwatch for training operations, cleaning equipment while conducting security assessments, remaining invisible while ensuring the safety of America's future defenders. This wasn't retirement. It was still service, performed by someone who had given so much to his country that his very identity had become a national security asset. The recruits trained harder, knowing they were being observed by someone who had already walked the path they struggled to follow. The instructors pushed them further, understanding that their students were being evaluated by standards even higher than the ones they themselves applied. And through it all, the janitor continued his quiet work, protecting both his cover and the men whose lives he had once saved in ways that would never appear in history books. In the world of special operations, some heroes wear medals and give speeches. Others disappear entirely, their contributions known only to the brotherhood that shared their sacrifices. The janitor belonged to the second category, invisible warriors who served in shadows and retired into deeper shadows, carrying secrets that would remain classified long after they were gone. But for those who knew what to look for, his presence was a reminder that heroism often wore the most ordinary disguises, and that sometimes the most extraordinary men were hiding in the most unexpected places. Still serving, still protecting, still honoring the oath they had sworn to defend their nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The ghost in the SEAL compound was real, and his story was just beginning to be understood. In the world of special operations, legends are born in darkness and retire into deeper darkness. This is the story of one such legend, told through the eyes of those who were privileged to witness greatness disguised as ordinary service. His name remains classified. His operations remain denied. But his presence among the next generation of warriors continues to inspire those who understand that true heroism often requires the ultimate sacrifice: anonymity.